Dawntrail has opened many doors to possible paths Final Fantasy XIV could take. However, it's also answered many questions, the most important of which may be where the game is going now that Hydaelyn and Zodiark have been resolved. Yoshi P stated after Endwalker's release that the threads for the next arc had already been laid, but it didn't become clear until Dawntrail released and we were introduced to the key that we had any idea what he meant. In Dawntrail, during the confrontation with Sphene, she describes the key's properties and its inherent power. She describes it as an object that responds to fervent prayers and all-consuming supplications that have given rise to many a miracle. This is not the first time we've seen an object described like this. In fact, with the exception of Heavensward, we've seen something matching this description in every single expansion, including A Realm Reborn. This is the description of Auracite. There are several kinds of Auracite mentioned throughout Final Fantasy XIV. The first one we're introduced to in A Realm Reborn is White Auracite, a product of Charlayan research. White Auracite acts as a vessel for ether and seals it within the crystal. It was used to trap both Nabrialis and Igiorum for their defeat, and we see it deployed by Thancred in the battle against Emet-Selch. The second kind we encounter is Ultima's Auracite. This is Auracite created by the High Seraph, and is meant to manipulate the creature's emotions to a terrifying degree. Some creatures affected even give birth to beasts known as Lucavi. The third is Synthetic Auracite, crafted using the research of Gaius Van Belsar, as he experimented with the Ultima weapon. This Auracite powers a system called an Oversoul, meant to imprint the memories and skills of the hero it was programmed to emulate. The fourth kind is Memoriat, used on the 13th during the Contra Memoria, when champions were manipulated by Igiorum into causing a calamity. Unakalhai confirms the crystal's properties and explains that their primal energies had bled out, causing their wielders to fall victim to the power of the Eidolon within. There exists the fifth kind, a type of regular Auracite that was used during the conflict between Bosja and the Allagan Empire, with the trigger weapon Save the Queen, crafted by the selfsame material by Allag. There exist several weapons like this, used throughout the Bosjan Resistance campaign, and others now in the possession of the 4th Garlean Legion. The type of Auracite described by Sphene as reacting to the Malala seeking to escape the 5th Umbral Calamity fits the description of the second type of Auracite. The Malala, in their desperation to escape, prayed so hard that the Auracite in the key reacted, allowing them to escape the source. Joke's on them, they still got rejoined before leaving. Since then, the key has been heavily modified by both Electrope and other as of yet unknown means, but at its core, it's a piece of white stone. This description of how it works, paired with the white stone we see, all but confirms what it is: Auracite. Specifically, the Auracite created by the High Seraph's influence. With this new information, and our knowledge of who and what the extra-dimensional traveler was capable of, it's a sure bet that this key has the ability to break down the barriers between shards, bridging a path by which we might travel dimensions with ease. By placing Auracite in Pandemonium, which eventually leads to the Praetorium, then tying it in with Ivalice, and now Dawntrail, this all but confirms that the threat of Ultima is looming once again, or rather, it never went away. This time, however, we're dealing with the original version of Ultima, rather than the primal version we defeated. How is this possible, you might say? The Return to Ivalice raid series gives us an excellent annotation of these events as they played out, going all the way back to the 4th Astral Era, when Saint Ajora, desperate to win the war with the Holy Edoran Empire, summoned Ultima, destroying and sinking the enemy capital of Milan beneath the waves. The Zodiac Braves condemned this, stating that Ajora summoned a demon instead of a savior. Through a bloody campaign, the Zodiac Braves managed to defeat Saint Ajora and his band of heretics, and with the help of the Mother Crystal, finally sealed Ultima away. Centuries later, Ultima awoke once again, this time as a primal, given form by the reverence and prayer of the legends passed down through the ages of the living god that had been sealed. The primal Ultima began to use Auracite to spread her influence and summon forth Lucavi. Eventually, the Warrior of Light Ramza and his party confronted her, and in a noble sacrifice to save the world, he and his party gave their lives to once again seal the primal Ultima away. Centuries later, in the modern day, the Warrior of Light receives a request from Genomus sen Lexentail, a Garlean playwright who is on a quest to recover the lost Durai papers. These documents were the missing link that painted Ramza as either a villain or hero throughout history for sacrificing himself and keeping the truth of Ultima hidden. However, he did not count on the High Seraph possessing his daughter, Alma, and using her as bait to lure the Warrior of Light to the Orban Monastery. After a brief bout with former heroes, the champion of the realm confronts the primal Ultima one last time, and with the help of the spirit of Ramza and his former band of adventurers, finally kills her, prompting the Seraph to cry out, "I am your mother, I am your maker, I am Ivalice. Consign me unto darkness, and your light will be forever lost," before dissipating. An extra-dimensional being of pure ruination, Ultima has existed on Etheirys even before the time of Pandemonium and Endwalker. During Pandemonium, while musing about where Athena obtained the Heart of Sabik, she describes its properties as aligning with those we saw centuries later, prompting us to draw the conclusion that it was no coincidence that she had obtained the stone from the Dark Harbinger, and that her personality in turn was affected by it, in the same way the Taurus Orosite affected Begamnon and Argath. It's likely that Ultima will once again reawaken at any time, but as a villain, what can we expect from her? For that, let's take a look at Ultima and other Final Fantasy games. Though Ultima as the High Seraph was series-wise introduced in Final Fantasy Tactics, in Ivalice lore, we must look to Final Fantasy XII to learn of her origin. She was created by the gods, said to be a masterpiece among the Scions. That is, the Espers, or those who would later become the Lucavi, and the sole representative of the Holy Element. The same that happens with her opposite, Zodiark, as the representative of the Dark Element. According to her bestiary entry in 12, Ultima was tasked with guiding souls to heaven and aiding in their reincarnation. However, she ultimately rebelled against her creator, and the Scions of Darkness joined her revolution. For this, all of them were cast down by the gods and imprisoned. A constant theme in 12 and Tactics is Zodiark never involving himself with Ultima's scheming, going so far as secluding himself in the depths of the Midlight Deep through his host, Elidibus, in Tactics. By the time of Final Fantasy Tactics, roughly a millennia later, Ultima is mentioned to have been summoned forth prior to the events of the game by Saint Ajora, who served as her host until one of his disciples, Germanique, betrayed him. Legend also speaks of the Zodiac Braves, warriors wielding sacred Orosite that appear in every age that is threatened by the Lucavi to deliver Ivalice from their grasp. With the crown in shambles and the outbreak of the War of the Lions between Dukes Larg and Goltana, the Church of Glabados concocted a scheme in order to take advantage of the political unrest. The Knights Templar, led by Folmar of Tangil, host to Hashmal, started recruiting promising candidates to play as hosts to the Lucavi and find the perfect vessel for Ultima, in order to allow her to manifest in the mortal world. Said perfect vessel turns out to be Alma Belv, Ramza's sister. Though it is also mentioned that a blood sacrifice that permeates the land is required as well, hence why Ultima is known as the Angel of Blood. This sacrifice was originally intended to be achieved by Ramza and his comrades' death in the airship graveyard of Milan. Hashmal fails to defeat him, and instead gores himself to offer his own blood in tribute to Ultima, summoning her into Alma. However, Alma resists Ultima's will through her love for her brother and expels her from her body, leading into the final fight, in which the siblings and their allies prevail over Ultima. Believed dead by Milan's collapse, Ramza and Alma actually survive. Pursued as heretics as they are, they leave the kingdom of Ivalice forever. Ultima's main defining trait that carries on to future references is, in fact, the desire for a vessel. This was already stated in the Return to Ivalice raid series, where Ultima possesses Alma Bath Lexentail and later kidnaps Ramza in order to lure the Warrior of Light to her, all because she covets the Warrior of Light as her vessel. This by itself raises many questions about the Warrior of Light, or rather, Azem, especially come Dawntrail and the key clearly operating on Orosite. However, here we are going strictly on the references, not speculation. So we move on to the most recent entry in the Final Fantasy series, which is the product of Creative Business Unit 3, the one in charge of Final Fantasy XIV. In Final Fantasy XVI, Ultima is the big bad of the story. Originally called Ultimalius, he was the king of the Ultima race, they who bestowed magic upon the world. However, in doing so, they also caused the Blight, draining the land of Aether and turning it into a black wasteland. Only 16 survived the Blight, and Ultimalius and his brethren were forced to flee their homeland aboard Origin, their Ark, in search for a new land to call home that was not tainted by the Blight. They found the realm of Valisthea, formed by the twins, the continents of Storm and Ash, as pure as fallen snow, and they deemed it the perfect place to put their plan into motion. In order to resurrect their kin, Ultimalius would need vast quantities of ether and a body resilient enough to survive casting the ultimate spell, Raise. So he turned 5 of his surviving kin into the Mother Crystals to pump Aether into Origin, and sowed the seeds of mankind so one day his perfect vessel, Mythos, would be born. With this, Ultimalius fell into slumber, and in his absence, mankind awoke to their free will, something that Ultimalius saw as the gravest of sins. Eventually, Mythos was born as Clive Rosfield, dominant of Ifrit, brother to Joshua, dominant of Phoenix. Old tapestries represent Mythos' perfect form as a fusion of Ifrit and Phoenix, which is in fact the form the brothers take when uniting as Ifrit Risen. During the course of Final Fantasy XVI, Ultima goads Clive into overcoming the other dominants and absorbing their power through trials and tribulations. Hence the Victory Fanfare's lyrics, Pathos begets Mythos in ancient Greek, and commands King Barnabas Thamur, a follower of the Circle of Malleus, worshippers of Ultima, to sever the bonds that unite Clive to his loved ones, since these bonds are what keep Clive from surrendering to his fate as the chosen vessel of the Lord. As Clive resists Ultimalius' will again and again, Ultimalia ponders if Clive has instead become Logos, and archived true freedom, in his eyes a false god. In the end, Clive absorbs Ultimalius himself, and destroys the Nexus with his power, erasing magic from Valisthea and starting a new era for mankind, truly freed from the yoke of their creator. Now, while Ultima and Final Fantasy XIV would surely be more than just a copy-paste from other titles, looking at you, Galbez and Zeromus, it's wise to bear in mind that 16 is the product of the 14 team's minds, and the game offers us a degree of insight into their workings that should not be dismissed. In terms of what makes Ultima and 16 special, it would be the casting of Raise, the ultimate spell, and the need of both Sons of Fire, Clive and Joshua, the aspects of destructive and healing flames as Ifrit and Phoenix. As an aside, carried from the works of Yasumi Matsuno, father of Ivalice, it's worth mentioning the most known precursor of Final Fantasy Tactics, Tactics Ogre. In the Return to Ivalice raid series, Ultima summons the demi-versions of the Lucavi, Famfrit, Hashmel, and Belias, plus her Tactics incarnation, through the incantation, Denizens of the Abyss, from Ink of Blackest Night, I summon you. This quote is taken straight from the necromancer Naibeth Abdelord, a character that is actually in 14 as the final boss of floor 100 of Palace of the Dead, a dungeon also taken from Tactics Ogre. Naibeth's experiments in Tactics Ogre with souls and the necromantic arts are ultimately a means to find a way to, quote, render death meaningless. Ultima arrived on the source before the Sundering, corrupted Athena, and eventually La Habrea. Ultima was sundered along with the rest of the world and slept until the 4th era when Saint Ajora summoned her, and the Zodiac Braves fought his heretics to defeat her. Hydaelyn eventually sealed her, and several centuries passed before people's fears and worship of her gave rise to a primal version of her, which was fought by Ramza and his party behind the scenes during the War of the Lions. They sacrificed their very souls to seal her and bury all knowledge of her, so she would not be summoned again. Years later, the Warrior of Light led an assault on the Praetorium, encountering the ancient, now Ascian, La Habrea. Driven mad by Auracite corruption, La Habrea used the Heart of Sabik to power the Ultima weapon and cast the spell Ultima, causing enormous devastation. Later, when the Warrior of Light finally arrived at the Arbonne Monastery, the primal Ultima was finally defeated, releasing Ramza and his friends to return to the Lifestream. After the events on the first, Pandemonium appeared in the Ethereal Sea, and after defeating Athena, who had been wholly corrupted by Auracite, the Heart of Sabik was recovered and left in Claudian's care. This may seem like the end of the story. However, it's highly probable that the Prime version of Ultima still exists. If that were not bad enough, it's a certainty that her shards on other reflections exist, as she was present on Aetheris before and during the Sundering. Ultima was likely content to sit back and allow the Ascians to do their work and rejoin her along with the rest of the worlds, rejoining her fragmented existence into her original, unsundered one. However, now that the Ascians have been defeated, Ultima is likely to have taken matters into her own hands. Much like Jenova in Final Fantasy VII, she's working to rejoin the pieces of herself by any means necessary to make herself whole, including rejoining the shards. With Hydaelyn, her greatest obstacle, now gone, Ultima and her shards likely feel that there is nothing that can stop her. And the Warrior of Light and the Scions, still unaware of the true threat looming, can only watch and wait for the monster who now stirs from her slumber.